The storm and the island. The storm hit without warning. One moment, the sky had been a serene expanse of blue, the kind of peaceful ocean view that made you think the world was still in balance. But nature, as it often does, had other plans. Dark clouds gathered swiftly, swirling like an angry ocean itself, blotting out the sunlight and casting a shadow over the sea. The winds picked up first, whistling like a warning before they began to howl, pushing Donald's small boat back and forth like a leaf caught in a violent current. Donald had been looking for escape. For months, he'd been dealing with the pressures of work, responsibilities, and the weight of decisions that felt too heavy to bear. He had set out on his boat, the sea breeze, hoping the vastness of the ocean would help him clear his mind. Alone, just him and the sea. But what he hadn't expected was the full wrath of the elements to meet him head-on. As the waves grew taller, crashing over the sides of the boat, Donald fought to keep control. His hands gripped the wheel, but the storm was relentless. Each wave felt like a giant, battering ram trying to shatter him and the boat into oblivion. His heart raced, his breath came in gasps, and his mind swirled with panic. Was this how it ended? Was this how he was going to die? Alone, out in the middle of the vast ocean. Hours passed in what felt like an eternity. Donald's body ached from the constant effort to steer the boat, to keep it afloat, to hold on to hope. He couldn't even see the horizon anymore. The world was swallowed by the storm. Waves smashed against the sides of his boat like battering rams, and the wind screamed around him. A deep sense of despair started to creep in. The sea breeze groaned as if it too was tiring from the struggle. He realized he was no longer in control. The storm had taken over. Just when he thought he could go no further, the boat lurched violently. It was too much. A wave higher than any he'd encountered before crashed over the deck, and before he could react, the sea breeze was turned on its side. The world tilted and Donald felt himself thrown into the cold water. The salty sea stung as it engulfed him, dragging him under. He fought against it, gasping for air, but it was no use. His body was battered by the violent current, his strength fading. And then, everything stopped. The storm ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The sky, once dark with clouds, cleared as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath. Donald broke the surface of the water, choking on salt and gasping for air. His heart was pounding in his chest. He was alive. For a moment, the realization didn't feel like relief. It felt like a cruel joke. He had been thrown from the boat, left to drown in the ocean. And now here he was, floating on the water, alone. There was nothing around him, just endless waves. His mind raced for answers, but there were none. The storm had taken him far from the course he had set. He had no idea where he was, no way to call for help. His thoughts wandered back to the storm, to the fear and panic that had gripped him. But the fear began to fade. There was only the vastness of the ocean now. And somewhere, deep in the water, he could feel a strange pull, a sense of something else. But what? The hours dragged on. Just when he thought he couldn't go any longer, his luck seemed to shift. Through the haze of exhaustion and uncertainty, he saw something ahead. Land. It was a faint silhouette against the horizon, but it was there. He pushed his exhausted body toward it, the salt water stinging his skin and his limbs burning with every stroke. The island grew larger as he approached, and with it, a strange sense of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was a new beginning. His body screamed in protest, but Donald pushed on, fighting the waves, each stroke taking him closer to the shore. The island was small but beautiful. Palm trees swayed in the wind, and vibrant flowers dotted the landscape. The air was thick with the fragrance of exotic blooms that he had never smelled before. The scent was both refreshing and calming. When Donald finally crawled up onto the sandy shore, he collapsed. He lay there for a few moments, breathing heavily, feeling the cool sand beneath him. The waves lapped gently at the shore behind him, almost like a lullaby. He felt the salty water on his skin, the remnants of the storm clinging to him. But here, on this remote island, he was alive. As he took in his surroundings, Donald realized the island was unlike any place he had ever seen. The trees were taller than any he had ever encountered, their trunks twisted in strange shapes. The flowers, too, were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were large and bright, almost glowing under the fading light. It was as if the island itself had been frozen in time, untouched by human hands. Donald sat up, his body still weak but his mind now alert. He had to figure out his next move. He couldn't stay on the beach forever. He needed shelter, food, and a way to signal for help. The storm had tossed him onto this island, but now he had to survive. With renewed determination, he stood up and began to explore. The underbrush was thick, the trees dense, but as he ventured deeper into the jungle, he found a small trail. It seemed well-trodden, almost like it had been made by something or someone before him. As he followed the path, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't truly alone. It wasn't just the strange energy of the island that made him feel this way. There was something more, something hidden, waiting. And then, through the trees, he saw it. A clearing opened up before him, and in the center, half buried in moss and vines, was a wrecked spaceship. Its metal surface was battered, with dents and scorch marks all over. It gleamed with an eerie, otherworldly sheen that sent a chill down his spine. Donald's heart raced. What had happened here? Who had come to this island? His curiosity surged, pushing him toward the wreckage. The island was beautiful, mysterious, and full of strange energy. But this ship was something else entirely. He knelt down beside it, running his fingers over the cold metal. Alien symbols were etched into the surface, symbols that were completely unfamiliar. This wasn't just a ship. It was a message from another world. And if there was one thing Donald knew, it was that this island was about to show him things he couldn't possibly imagine. He heard a faint sound, something almost like a whisper, coming from within the wreckage. His heart skipped a beat. Whatever had happened here, he knew it was far from over. The echoes of the unknown. The air around the wrecked spaceship felt charged, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Donald stood frozen for a moment, his hand still resting on the cold, scorched surface of the alien ship. The whisper, faint but undeniable, sent a shiver down his spine. Was it the wind? No, this wasn't the sound of the breeze moving through the trees. It was something different, something intentional, something that seemed to beckon him closer. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. His mind raced. The ship was like nothing he had ever seen before. It wasn't just the sleek design, unlike any human-made technology. It was the sheer presence of it. The strange, unearthly symbols etched across its surface, glowing faintly as though alive, filled him with an indescribable sense of awe and trepidation. What had left this behind? As Donald carefully moved toward the wreckage, he noticed that the surrounding jungle seemed unnaturally still. The usual sounds of birds chirping, insects buzzing, and the rustling of leaves had all fallen silent, as though the island itself was waiting, watching. The faint whisper grew louder, almost imperceptible at first, but then clearer, a rhythmic hum that reverberated through the ground beneath his feet. It was calling him, urging him to investigate further. He crouched beside the wrecked ship, pushing aside the thick vines that had begun to overtake the once metallic structure. His fingers brushed against something soft, almost like fabric, buried beneath layers of moss and debris. As he cleared away the vines, his eyes widened. What he had uncovered was not a part of the ship's exterior. It was a strange, humanoid figure, or at least, it seemed to be. The being was unlike any human or animal he had ever encountered. Its skin was smooth and translucent, almost glowing with a faint light, and its body was slender, almost fragile-looking. Its eyes, however, were the most striking feature, large and dark, like two pools of deep ink, seemingly endless in their depth. The creature's form was suspended in some kind of crystalline cocoon, as if it had been encased in a protective barrier. Donald reached out, his heart pounding in his chest as he gently touched the crystal. The moment his fingers made contact, the cocoon hummed and the figure inside stirred. The whisper became a voice, low and melodic, as if trying to communicate directly with him. Donald's mind raced. Could this be some kind of alien life form? Was it alive? The creature's eyes fluttered open, locking with his gaze. For a moment, everything else in the world ceased to exist. The storm, the wrecked ship, even the island around him. All of it faded into the background as he stared into the creature's eyes. It wasn't just the alienness of the being that struck him. There was an undeniable sense of familiarity, as if he had known these eyes, these depths, his entire life. "Who are you?" Donald whispered, his voice trembling. The creature blinked slowly, and for a brief second, he thought he saw a flicker of understanding in its eyes. But it didn't speak. Instead, a strange energy surged through the crystal cocoon. It vibrated, softly at first, then more intensely, until with a sudden jolt, the cocoon cracked open like fragile glass, disintegrating into a cloud of glittering dust. The creature fell forward, landing gracefully on the ground, its movements fluid and elegant. It stood before him, its height almost matching Donald's, though its form was delicate and otherworldly. It regarded him with an expression that seemed both curious and calm, as if it had been waiting for him. For a moment, Donald could only stare and wonder, unsure of what to do next. His mind was still processing the impossibility of what he was seeing. The creature raised one hand, its long fingers barely brushing the air, and a pulse of energy radiated outward. The pulse filled the space between them, like a wave of warmth and light. Donald felt an overwhelming sense of peace and clarity sweep over him, as if every question he had ever had about the universe suddenly became clear. His breath caught in his throat, and for the first time since he had been thrown into the sea, he felt truly alive, not just physically, but connected to something far greater than himself. But before he could speak, the creature's gaze turned away from him, scanning the surrounding jungle. The hum in the air grew louder, almost urgent now, as if the island itself were responding to the creature's presence. The trees seemed to sway in a way that suggested they were more aware than they had any right to be. And then, through the dense foliage, Donald saw something that made his blood run cold. Figures emerged from the shadows. More of them. They were unlike the creature before him, their forms hulking and menacing, made of dark, jagged metal, like twisted suits of armor. Their movements were mechanical, deliberate, and they carried weapons that glinted under the faint light of the clearing. There were 4 of them in total, each one towering over the alien creature. Protective beings, Donald muttered under his breath, a chill running down his spine. It was clear now, these weren't just random figures. These were guardians, sentinels. The creature's expression didn't change as it looked at the approaching figures. It stood tall, almost regal, and Donald could sense that it was not afraid. Despite their imposing appearance, it was clear that this being was not a prisoner. It was a force of its own, and the island was its domain. The leader of the metal figures, the largest and most imposing, stepped forward, raising a hand as if to command the others to stop. His voice, when it came, was deep and echoing, resonating in a way that shook the air around them. "You are not supposed to be here," the figure said, its voice a metallic rasp. It wasn't directed at Donald, but at the creature in front of him. "The trial is over. You failed." The alien being didn't flinch. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as though considering the figure's words carefully. Donald's heart raced, but he remained silent, unsure of what was happening. These beings, whatever they were, seemed to be caught in a conflict that was far beyond his understanding. The leader of the armored beings raised his weapon, a long spear-like device with glowing red energy coursing through its core. "You must return with us," it said firmly. "You will be judged." Judged? What did that even mean? Donald's mind raced, but his instincts kicked in. Whatever was happening here, he couldn't let this alien creature, this being that had shown him a strange sense of peace, be harmed. His hand reached for the jagged rock on the ground nearby. His grip tightened around it. It was a futile attempt, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing. But before he could make a move, the creature's eyes locked onto his once again. It wasn't the peaceful gaze from before. It was sharper now, intense. It was as though it was trying to communicate something, as if it could read his thoughts, and the message was clear: stay out of this. A strange weight filled the air, and for a moment, everything went silent. The trees stopped swaying, the whispers of the island disappeared, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Donald's chest tightened as he realized the situation was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about an alien creature or a spaceship wreck. It was about something far larger, something that had been brewing on this island for a long time. In the stillness, the creature's eyes softened slightly. Then, without a word, it stepped forward, meeting the armored figure's stares with unshakable resolve. The hum of energy around it intensified, filling the clearing with a radiant light. Donald's heart pounded, and in that moment, he understood. Whatever was happening here, whatever this creature represented, it was a pivotal moment, not just for this island, but for something much, much larger. As the light expanded, Donald shielded his eyes, and when he opened them again, the clearing was empty. The alien being had vanished. The armored figures had disappeared, and the wrecked ship, now lifeless and cold, sat alone in the center of the clearing. Donald stood there, breathless, staring at the spot where the creature had been, the echoes of its presence still lingering in the air. What had just happened? And what was about to unfold on this strange, isolated island? The unraveling truth. The jungle was eerily quiet as Donald stood in the clearing, trying to grasp what had just transpired. The towering trees, once alive with the sounds of wildlife, were now muted, as if the very island had gone into hiding. The light from the setting sun flickered through the dense canopy above, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own, bending unnaturally. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, questions that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, refusing to be ignored. The alien creature, the sentinels, the mysterious disappearance. All of it was like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. He had seen something beyond the ordinary, something that didn't belong in the realm of human understanding. And now he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled into something far larger than himself. Donald's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced back at the wreckage of the spaceship. The metal frame, now darkened by soot and debris, seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. It was as if the ship was a living organism, breathing in time with the island, waiting for something or someone. The strange markings on its surface, still faintly glowing, now seemed more like a warning. It wasn't just the technology that made it extraordinary. It was the sense of urgency in the air, the feeling that something ancient and powerful was awakening. He took a cautious step forward, his feet crunching softly on the overgrown ground. The silence was deafening, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. There was something out there in the dense jungle, something beyond the creatures he had encountered already. The memory of the armored beings, the sentinels, lingered like a shadow in the back of his mind. They had come for the alien being. Had they been hunting it, or was there more to the story? And what did the creature mean when it had said, "Stay out of this"? Donald's mind began to spin, his sense of time slipping away. The sun was setting now, and the faint orange light bathed the forest in a melancholic glow. He knew he needed to leave. He couldn't stay here, but something held him in place, some invisible force tugging at his curiosity. He needed to understand what had just happened, to piece together the fragments of this bizarre encounter. A rustling sound broke through the stillness, snapping him out of his reverie. Donald turned sharply, his heart racing as his instincts kicked in. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in the dark green and brown hues of the jungle, moving with a fluid grace that was both unnerving and mesmerizing. It was another humanoid, But this one was unlike the creature he had encountered before. The skin was darker, almost obsidian in its hue, and the eyes, those eyes, glowed with a faint ethereal light. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it knew Donald was watching. But unlike the other being, there was no peace in its gaze, no connection. This one was different. It was guarded, as though it were assessing him. Donald stood frozen, his mind racing. Was this one friend or foe? Was it here to help, or was it another piece in the puzzle he couldn't yet understand? It spoke, its voice soft but unmistakable. "You should not be here." The words sent a shiver down Donald's spine, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped forward, his curiosity overpowering his fear. I don't know what's happening," he confessed, his voice shaky. "I found something beyond understanding. I saw what happened to the other one. The creature, it was peaceful, but the others came for it. What is this? What is going on?" The figure regarded him silently for a moment, its glowing eyes never leaving his. The silence between them stretched on, tense and palpable, before it finally spoke again. "It is the island. The trials. They are ancient, older than you can fathom." "Trials," Donald repeated, trying to make sense of the words. "What trials? And what is that ship? What is it doing here?" The figure took another step forward, its gaze softening for a brief moment. "That ship, it is but a small piece of something much greater. The trials are a test of worth, a test that has been unfolding for millennia. It is not your place to understand yet. You are not prepared." Donald's heart skipped a beat. Prepared? What does that mean? Who are you? What are you? The figure's eyes narrowed slightly, its lips parting as though it were about to speak. But then, a distant, low rumble filled the air. It was a sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth, reverberating through the jungle and shaking the ground beneath Donald's feet. The figure tensed, its body becoming rigid as it looked toward the source of the sound. "It is time," it muttered under its breath, more to itself than to Donald. Then, with surprising speed, it turned toward the jungle and began to move, disappearing into the thick foliage. Donald didn't hesitate. He knew something had just shifted, something had changed, and he couldn't afford to stay behind. The trial. What trial? He had no idea what was going on, but he wasn't going to let it pass him by. He followed the figure, moving as quietly as he could, his breath quickening with every step. The sounds of the jungle had returned, but they were different now, urgent, layered with an underlying tension. As he moved deeper into the jungle, Donald realized something else. The ship, it was no longer just a wreck. It was a beacon. The way the creature had vanished, and the way the island had responded, it was as though the ship had called to the jungle, to the beings within it. They were coming. Suddenly, the figure ahead of him stopped. Donald almost collided with it, but just in time, he slowed his pace, stepping back into the shadows. The figure was staring intently at something ahead, its gaze locked on a series of faintly glowing symbols embedded into the ground. They looked like ruins, old and forgotten, half hidden by vines and thick roots. But now, in the dimming light, they were unmistakable. There was a pattern to them, a design that seemed to pulse with energy. "They are here," the figure said, its voice barely above a whisper. "The Sentinels. They will come for you now. For all of us." Donald's heart raced. The Sentinels. They were the ones who had chased the creature. Were they after him now? Before he could ask any more questions, the figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath them shifted. The symbols on the ground flared to life, glowing brighter, and the air became heavy with the scent of ozone. Donald gasped, feeling the electricity in the air crackle against his skin. Then, from the jungle's depths, there was a sound, a low mechanical hum. The ground shook again, this time more violently, as if something massive was approaching. The Sentinels were here, and they weren't alone. Donald's breath caught in his throat. The jungle had come alive, the trees moving as though guided by an unseen force. He could feel it, the presence of something powerful, something beyond his comprehension, moving closer with every passing second. It wasn't just the island that was shifting. It was the world itself. The convergence. The tension in the air was palpable as the hum from the depths of the jungle grew louder, closer. Donald's pulse quickened. He tried to steady his breath, but the overwhelming sense of foreboding made it nearly impossible. The figure, this mysterious being that had been guiding him through the jungle, now stood motionless, its back rigid, eyes locked on the growing disturbance. Whatever was coming, it was beyond his understanding, beyond anything he had ever imagined. The jungle itself seemed to bend to the will of something invisible, its dense foliage swaying as if to clear a path for what was about to emerge. The ground trembled beneath Donald's feet, the vibrations echoing up his spine. He instinctively took a step back, his heart hammering in his chest. The figure, however, did not flinch. It stood firm, as though waiting for the inevitable to unfold. "What's happening?" Donald whispered, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound composed. The figure turned slowly, its glowing eyes now focused entirely on him. "The Sentinels have found us, but they are not the greatest threat." Its voice was calm, yet there was an edge to it, an urgency that made every word feel heavy with meaning. Donald felt a chill spread down his arms. "What do you mean? Who or what could be worse than them?" The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it stepped forward, beckoning Donald to follow. "We must move quickly. There is no time to explain fully, but know this. The Sentinels are bound by a higher power, one that governs the very fabric of reality. What you are witnessing here is not just a fight for survival. It is a battle for the control of the cosmos itself." Donald's mind reeled at the implications. The cosmos, a battle for control. None of it made sense. He had come to this island thinking he was simply lost, that he had stumbled across some isolated piece of Earth that had yet to be touched by modern civilization. But now he realized that everything about this place was far beyond anything he had ever known. The alien ship, the Sentinels, the figure in front of him, all of it was connected to something far larger, something that involved not just the island, but the entire universe. A sharp crack broke through the air, followed by the sound of something large moving through the dense foliage. Donald's gaze snapped toward the jungle, his heart racing. Out of the shadows emerged a group of towering figures, Sentinels. Their metallic forms gleamed in the fading light, their glowing eyes cold and unblinking. There were at least a dozen of them, each one seemingly identical to the others, their movements synchronized as though they shared a single consciousness. The figure beside Donald did not hesitate. It lunged forward, moving with a speed that seemed unnatural, almost fluid. Donald, his body stiff with fear, scrambled to keep up, his legs shaking with each step. As he moved, he glanced over his shoulder, only to see the Sentinels closing in on them. They were relentless, unyielding, and their presence alone was enough to send a shiver down his spine. They were approaching quickly, but the figure in front of Donald seemed unbothered by their proximity. It stopped abruptly and turned to face him, its gaze intense. "Do not look back," it ordered, its voice firm. Donald didn't understand why, but instinctively he obeyed. He kept his eyes locked on the path ahead, focusing on every step. His body moved on autopilot, a primal fear propelling him forward. Ahead, the path began to narrow, and the trees grew taller, thicker, as if the island itself were trying to encircle them, trapping them. The air grew heavy with humidity, thick enough to taste, and the ground beneath their feet became slick with moss and mud. As the jungle seemed to press in from all sides, Donald's mind raced. The figure turned to him once again, but this time, there was something different in its expression. "They're not just here for the ship," it said, voice low and full of something unspoken. "They are here for you, for the one who is awakening." Donald stopped dead in his tracks. "What do you mean? Awakening?" I don't understand. The figure's eyes flashed with urgency. You have been chosen. This island, it is a nexus, a place of convergence. All the forces you've encountered, the ship, the sentinels, the trials, they have brought us to this moment. The ground trembled again, but this time, the shockwave was more intense. Donald had to brace himself against a nearby tree to stay upright. The jungle around them seemed to shift, as if the earth itself was moving in response to the energy building in the distance. The sentinels were closing in faster now, and in the midst of all the chaos, the figure finally revealed what had been hidden from Donald all along. You are part of a greater plan, the figure said, its voice strangely soothing amidst the madness. This island is not just a place. It is a key, a gateway to something far more ancient than any of us. The ship you found, it is a signal, a calling. The trials are a test for those who will inherit this power. Donald's breath caught in his throat. Inherit this power? What power? He was just a man who had crash-landed on an island. He wasn't special. He wasn't a part of some cosmic plan. The figure turned to face him fully now, its eyes unwavering. You may not understand it yet, but you are already part of the equation. The sentinels will stop at nothing to ensure that you do not awaken. If you are to survive, you must embrace what lies within you. Before Donald could respond, the jungle erupted with a deafening roar, louder than anything he had ever heard. The ground beneath his feet cracked open, and from the rift, a massive, pulsating light shot up into the sky. The energy from the light was blinding, and Donald stumbled backward, shielding his eyes from the intensity. The sentinels faltered for a brief moment, their mechanical forms halted by the force of the eruption. And then, as the light grew brighter, a figure emerged from the center of the rift. It was massive, towering over everything else, its body radiating with an aura of pure, unrestrained power. The figure seemed to be both physical and ethereal, a hybrid of substance and energy, as if it had transcended the very boundaries of time and space. Its presence alone caused the air to vibrate, and the ground beneath Donald's feet seemed to buckle under its weight. The sentinels recoiled, their cold, unblinking eyes now filled with a strange, almost fearful reverence. The massive figure, now fully emerged from the rift, began to speak in a voice that seemed to echo across the entire island. This is the end of the trial. The voice boomed, its resonance shaking the very air. The reckoning is upon us. Donald stood frozen, his body trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. What had he just witnessed? What was this being that had just emerged? The figure turned its gaze toward him, locking eyes with Donald. Its presence felt like it was pulling him in, as if it were calling to something deep within him. The awakening had begun. The awakening. The world seemed to go silent as the massive figure loomed over the island, its presence suffocating everything around it. The jungle, the sentinels, even the crackling energy from the rift. All of it felt like it was bending to the will of this ancient being. Donald could barely breathe, his body frozen in place as his mind struggled to process what was happening. The being, if it could even be called that, shifted its weight, and then, with a slow, deliberate movement, extended one of its hands toward him. The air around it shimmered with a strange, almost otherworldly energy, and as the being's hand reached out, the jungle around Donald seemed to exhale. The trees bent slightly, the ground shifted again, and the sky above darkened as if the sun itself were dimming in reverence. Donald's heart pounded in his chest as the figure's voice filled his mind, soft yet commanding, echoing in his very soul. You have come far, child, but the path ahead is treacherous. You must embrace your purpose, or the island's fate will be sealed. Donald stumbled back, his feet slipping on the mud as the words vibrated through his body. I don't understand, he shouted, his voice hoarse, barely audible over the growing storm. What is my purpose? Why me? I'm just a guy who crashed here. What is this place? What's going on? The being's eyes, glowing with a soft, radiant light, regarded him with an expression that seemed both patient and sorrowful. The jungle around them seemed to pulse with energy, as though it, too, were listening, waiting for the answer. "You are not just a man, Donald," the voice continued, this time more firm, more insistent. "You are a key. This island, this place you have stumbled upon, is a nexus. It is where worlds converge, where destinies are forged and broken. Your arrival was no accident. You are a part of something ancient, something that has waited for millennia to unfold." The sentinels, still standing in formation, seemed to twitch slightly, their unblinking eyes now watching Donald with an almost predatory intensity. They had been so focused on the figure, but now their gaze shifted toward him. Donald could feel their cold, calculating eyes on him, each one analyzing him as though he were a puzzle to be solved. "I don't want any part of this," Donald cried, his voice growing desperate. "I just want to go home. This isn't real. None of this makes sense." The figure's hand remained outstretched, and Donald felt an unnatural force tugging at him. He wanted to pull away, to run, but his legs were locked in place, as though they were trapped in an invisible vice. A low, almost comforting hum emanated from the being's body, and Donald felt a strange warmth spread through him. Despite the fear, there was something else, something deep within him, that was being awakened, stirred by the energy radiating from the figure. The figure spoke again, its voice now quieter, almost a whisper. "You have always known there was something more, haven't you? That something inside you, something you couldn't name, couldn't understand. That is the power within you, Donald. It has always been there." Donald's breath caught in his throat. He thought back to his life before this, his monotonous job, the dull routine, the growing sense of emptiness that had followed him for years. Even before the crash, he had always felt as though he were missing something, as though there was more to life than what he had been told. Could it be possible? Could all of this, the crash, the island, the strange beings, be the answer to everything he had unknowingly searched for? The figure seemed to sense his thoughts. "You are the one who can unlock the ancient powers of this place. You are the key to the convergence. The sentinels were sent to test you, to judge your worth. But there is more at stake now than simply passing their trials." Suddenly, the jungle around them erupted with an ear-splitting crack, and a blinding light shot up from the center of the island. The sentinels, now moving in unison, raised their arms, their metallic forms glowing with an eerie energy. The ground rumbled beneath Donald's feet, and the figure's eyes narrowed. "This is it," the being said, its voice grim. "The convergence has begun." As the light from the rift grew brighter, a deep, resonant voice boomed across the island, a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself, from the air, from everywhere. It wasn't speaking in words, exactly, but in something deeper, more primal. A language older than anything Donald had ever known. "Let the trial begin." The energy from the rift surged forward, and Donald's body was suddenly flooded with an intense, searing warmth. It was as if every cell in his body was being restructured, rewritten. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt as though he were being torn apart, pulled in every direction at once. His mind, too, seemed to be pulled from its moorings, drifting through a kaleidoscope of images, memories, and possibilities that made no sense. He saw glimpses of other worlds, worlds of untold beauty and unimaginable horror. He saw battles between forces that defied comprehension, great cosmic entities locked in eternal struggle. And at the center of it all, there was a vision of himself, standing at the crossroads of creation, holding the power to reshape everything. His heart raced as he fought to hold on to himself, to stay grounded. He couldn't let go. Not now, not when everything was about to change. The figure, sensing his struggle, reached out once more, placing a hand on his shoulder. The touch was light, but it was enough to anchor him, to bring him back from the brink of oblivion. "Focus, Donald. You must control it. The power is yours to wield, but only if you are strong enough to bear it." With those words, the universe seemed to shift. The light from the rift intensified, and the jungle began to melt away, transforming into something entirely different. Donald felt the ground beneath his feet give way as the world around him disintegrated into a sea of swirling, shifting energy. For a brief, terrifying moment, he was falling, weightless, unable to grasp onto anything. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the falling stopped. Donald opened his eyes, and he found himself standing in an entirely new realm. It was vast. Endless skies stretched out before him, filled with swirling nebulas and stars. The ground beneath his feet was solid but translucent, like glass, and through it he could see the depths of space, galaxies swirling in the distance. The figure was beside him, its glowing form now shimmering with even more intensity. "Welcome, Donald," it said, its voice resonating through the cosmos itself. "This is the point of no return. The convergence is complete. You must now decide. Will you embrace your destiny and unlock the secrets of the universe? Or will you turn away, allowing all of creation to collapse into chaos?" Donald stood frozen, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The power he had always sought, the purpose that had eluded him, was within his grasp. But at what cost? What was he truly prepared to sacrifice? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain. There was no going back now. The fate of the island, the fate of the universe, rested on his shoulders. The choice. The vast expanse of the cosmos stretched infinitely around Donald, each star twinkling with untold mysteries, each swirling nebula whispering secrets older than time itself. The air was thick with energy, yet paradoxically, it felt completely still, as if time itself had stopped to watch him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, each breath growing heavier, each heartbeat louder. The figure beside him, now radiating a blinding light, was no longer just a being. It was an embodiment of fate, a force that existed beyond his understanding. "Everything you've known, everything you've been, has led you to this moment." The being's voice reverberated through his mind, its tone both ancient and wise, yet filled with an undeniable urgency. "The power you sense, the power you can feel in your veins, it is not a gift, Donald. It is a responsibility, a burden. You must choose whether to wield it or allow it to slip into oblivion, never to be understood, never to be used." Donald could feel the energy surging around him, pulsing in waves, growing stronger with each passing second. His heart raced in sync with the universe, the hum of cosmic power vibrating through his body. The choice laid before him was unfathomably vast, stretching across time, space, and destiny itself. In that moment, every question he'd ever asked, every doubt he'd ever had, seemed insignificant. What mattered now wasn't the past, but the potential future, his future, and the future of everything. "Will you become the keeper of the Nexus?" the figure continued, "or will you turn away, leaving the fabric of existence to unravel? This power is both a creator and a destroyer. It is capable of uniting worlds, or shattering them beyond recognition. The Sentinels tested you, but now you face the ultimate trial." Donald looked around him, at the endless cosmic ocean, and thought back to everything he had witnessed. The jungle, the Sentinels, the rift, the trials he had barely understood. His mind raced, and yet it felt strangely clear now. He had been searching for meaning for his entire life, searching for purpose, searching for the why behind the pain, the confusion, the loneliness. And now, standing at the edge of the universe, the answers were finally within reach. But with those answers came an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Could he, a mere man, wield the power of the Nexus? Could he truly hold the fate of entire worlds in his hands? The figure's eyes seemed to bore into him, knowing his inner turmoil. "You doubt yourself, but doubt is a luxury you can no longer afford. Do you understand, Donald? The Nexus chose you. Your arrival here, the trials, the power, it was never random. You were chosen because you possess what it takes. your past, your fears, your desires, none of it matters now. What matters is your heart, your will. Donald's pulse quickened. The being was right. He had always felt like something was missing, like he had been wandering through life, half asleep, never quite fitting in. But here, in the presence of this immense power, he felt the truth inside him. He had always been meant for this. It wasn't just some random accident. This island, this nexus, had been waiting for him, waiting for the moment when he would be ready to choose. The choice, he realized, was not between power or no power. It was between creation and destruction. Could he create? Could he reshape the universe into something better? Donald looked down at his hands, now glowing with an energy that seemed to surge with an intelligence of its own. He could feel it, the weight of it, coursing through him, filling him with a sense of purpose that had never been there before. This was what he had been searching for his entire life. Meaning, not the kind that came from ordinary work or routine, but the kind that connected him to everything. The stars, the earth, the universe, his place in the grand tapestry of existence. And yet, despite the power at his fingertips, he felt a deep sense of dread. Power had corrupted others before him. Power had destroyed civilizations, crushed dreams, and torn worlds apart. Could he be different? Could he be the one to wield it for the greater good? He turned to face the figure, his voice shaking but resolute. I don't know if I can do this. What if I fail? What if I destroy everything? The figure remained silent for a moment, its gaze unwavering. Then it spoke softly, its words as gentle as the wind, yet as heavy as 1,000 suns. You are not alone, Donald. The Nexus does not choose just one to bear its power. It is shared. It is a connection. You will have the support of those you love, and even those you have yet to meet. But you must first choose. Will you embrace your purpose and step forward, or will you shrink away from it, allowing the darkness to return? Donald felt a deep surge of emotion. The weight of the universe, of all existence, was upon his shoulders. But it wasn't just about him. It was about the people he loved, the worlds he had yet to discover, the lives that were at stake. His failure would cost them everything. I'll do it, he said, the words leaving his mouth with a sense of finality. I'll embrace it. I'll do whatever it takes to protect this world, this Nexus, and all the others. I won't run from my destiny. The moment the words left his lips, the energy around him surged. The cosmos seemed to bend in response, the stars shining brighter as the fabric of reality itself seemed to shimmer with renewed life. The jungle, the sentinels, even the rift. It all transformed, shifting into a form that resonated with the new harmony Donald had chosen to embrace. The figure nodded, its form beginning to dissipate into the light. So it is done. You have chosen your path, Donald. The Nexus is yours to protect. The convergence is complete. You are now the guardian of worlds. As the figure faded completely, Donald stood alone at the center of the cosmic expanse. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, but it was no longer a burden. It was a power he had earned, a power that would shape the future, not just of this island, but of the entire universe. He looked around, feeling the deep sense of connection to everything around him. The stars, the planets, the infinite stretches of space. The energy of the Nexus flowed through him, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. He was no longer just a man lost in the world. He was part of something greater. The rift behind him flickered with a soft light, a reminder of the trials that had brought him to this point. And as he gazed into the distance, toward the infinite horizon, he knew that his journey was far from over. This was just the beginning. The Guardian of Worlds had awoken, and nothing would ever be the same again.